Well, welcome to South Pacific Private's Facebook Live event on anxiety. We just might wait a minute or two as people log in. Of course, we're going to be talking about anxiety, and I'll probably talk a little bit about depression because they do tend to go hand in hand. If you've logged on tonight, firstly, I want to acknowledge you for doing that. It's actually courageous to admit that we're suffering from anxiety, or it's a feeling that we have quite constantly in our lives. Marianne Williamson recently said at a talk she gave, if you're not anxious today, you're not paying attention. I think there's some truth in that for many of us. And for many of us who've come from dysfunctional families or traumatised families, we will have lived with a sense of anxiety most of our lives from when we were little. So we think it's normal, actually, a lot of the time. So it isn't about not having the anxiety or not having the fear, but it is about the courage to face it and own it. There are various levels of fear, as we know. When we're little, we'll be frightened of things, frightened of the dark, or frightened of some friend won't want to play with us. And they're quite rational and reasonable, and they're age appropriate, because when we're little, we're moving through stages of growth and ego states. The interesting thing for me about that, though, is that if we've come from dysfunctional families in any way, and sometimes that's hard for many of us to even recognise, we will have lived with fear as a child, and it will exacerbate as we get into our adulthood. Now, there are various types of fear, various types of anxiety that we can experience. The first one's a sort of generalised anxiety disorder. This is severe, it's ongoing, it interferes with our daily activities. It will often mean, for example, we'll stay in a job that we're not happy with because we're too frightened to leave it, we're too frightened to take the jump and try something new. There's often negative self-talk associated with that. We think, well, I couldn't get a job better than this, I should just stay here and sort of stay small. Often people I've worked with anxiety often experience life as wanting to be not seen and feeling small in their lives. Another type of anxiety that we often work with here at South Pacific is a social anxiety disorder, that's a more chronic mental health condition. It affects our social interactions, and some of those social interactions cause a sort of irrational anxiety, that it will be, I'm not welcome there, people don't like me, I don't feel like I'm good enough to mix with those sort of people. And that can be quite limiting in the fact that, largely most of us yearn for connection through our lives. So if we've got social anxiety disorder that keeps us separate from people, we're really going to struggle to connect with other people, which exacerbates the anxiety and can often then lead to depression. Because as I said when I started, anxiety and depression go hand in hand. Now, if in fact we've had difficulty as children in a dysfunctional family, perhaps we've had a dad or mum who's been quite sort of angry, or maybe we've had older siblings that have bullied us, or we've been bullied at school, it'll develop from the low-grade sort of fear, which is in and of itself a functional emotion, and an emotion that actually keeps us safe and keeps us looking at the things around us. Am I safe? Is it okay to be here? Not the irrational fear. But if it moves from that to panic and terror, then we're in a panic attack. Now, if you've ever had a panic attack, you'll know. You'll get heart palpitations, you'll get very hot and sweaty, sometimes you feel like you're going to pass out, and you'll become totally overwhelmed. And yet, in and of itself, when you look around you, there's nothing to really indicate that you would have needed to go to that level of terror. And my suggestion about that is that that's a trauma response from unresolved childhood events that haven't been addressed. This is carried from our childhood, carried feelings, carried fear. If you had a mum that was particularly frightened or a parent that was particularly frightened, you will carry the fear from the parent. Agoraphobia is the next step on, of course. It's where we have fear of places and situations that might cause us to panic, might cause us to feel helpless, might cause us to feel embarrassed, and it develops into a fear of not wanting to leave home or not wanting to leave the space where we feel safe. And of course, obsessive compulsive disorder is the next level. So you can see there's various levels of anxiety, and from my perspective, most of them, when they become problematic for us, that is when they're stopping us living our life freely, socialising freely and connecting with other people freely, or working and changing work or holidaying or all of the things that we love to do, then it's often related to what is unresolved from our childhood. Now at South Pacific, we talk a lot about the neuroscience. We talk about depression, anxiety, are both unconscious and habitual expressions of a person's perception of their safety in the world. And we all want to feel safe. Both anxiety and depression indicate we have dysregulation around fight, flight or freeze or fawn. That's what we talk about it. So what will happen is there'll be an event. We'll go to that part of our brain, the limbic part of the brain where we go into fight, flight. And fight, flight was that's for us to, if there's a lion sort of racing through the door, well, I want to get up and run. I mean, I'm not going to stand there and debate with the lion, am I? That's an instinctive thing. But if I'm actually in fight or flight for too long as a child who's traumatised or an adult who's in a frightening situation, domestic violence, then I'm going to actually be in fight or flight quite a lot. And if I'm in fight or flight, or even fawn, which is that people-pleasing space, if I'm there a lot, then I'm going to go to freeze. And when I go to freeze, I've got an inner conflict, I require action, and I can't move. I can't think what's the right thing to do, and I can't take action to protect myself. Now, so you see, anxiety and depression's multifaceted, and it's unique to each of us. There will be many people who would have a low-grade anxiety and they've lived with that for a very long time. But when they get to a point where it becomes very inhibitive of their life, that's when we would be suggesting that you reach out for help, that you get some sort of assistance about, even unpacking it with a professional about whether you need to come into a facility like South Pacific to unpack it, whether you need to go into therapy on a regular basis, or whether you need to take medication. And some people need to take medication and some people don't. I've had clients who battled on for 12 months after a serious anxiety attack, not wanting to take medication, wanting to be sort of resolute about it and stoic. It's their choice. I've supported them, and then eventually they get to a point where they think, it's too hard. This is too hard. I had one man that every time he had to speak, he had a big business, and every time he had to speak publicly, he'd be sweating profusely and overwhelmed. Extremely capable at his work. And finally he said to me, look, I think you're right. I think we should, I should investigate whether I go on medication. He went on medication. He was in South Pacific for a time. He went on medication, settled down. After a month or so, because often medication takes a month or so to settle, I said to him, how are you doing now? He said, no anxiety. There you go. He said, I could have saved myself 12 months of pain. But, we all go through our own process about managing what our anxiety is and how it affects us. There are certain steps that we can take that will help us recover. And of course, if it's critical, I would always suggest you see a professional. I would always suggest you have a session with our intake people to see if they think that you could be assisted by South Pacific. But I also think that whilst going through that process, there are things that we can do that can calm us, because it is about coming back to ourselves. If we're anxious, it means we're frightened. If we're frightened, it means we feel that we're not safe. So we're living in the catastrophic view of what will happen in the future. Now, if we're depressed, we have low-grade mood, we have a sense of not being able to get out of our own way, nothing's going to change, it's all hopeless, we're actually living in the past. So it doesn't matter whatever's happening in the present in either of those two scenarios, because you're not here in the present. And the steps that we'd be suggesting that you take to try and come back into yourself is things that will centre our emotions, for example. Mindfulness, so it's meditation. Now, it doesn't matter if you sit and listen to a beautiful piece of music for 10 minutes, quietly on your own. If you can meditate, all the better. If you can journal, by all means do. In fact, years ago, a book was published and it was about getting blocks for creative people out of the way. You know, the people that were writers and artists, and they'd hit a block and they wouldn't be able to get through it. And an author suggested you do 15 minutes rapid writing. And I've suggested to a number of my anxious clients that they try this. So they get a journal and a pen, they put their phone on 15-minute timer, they turn it off on silent, and they journal for 15 minutes. Now I say to them, you just keep writing. You don't worry about spelling, punctuation, whether it makes sense. No one's reading it. You may not even read it. And halfway through you'll get to this stage. 15 minutes is quite a long time when you're doing rapid writing, let me tell you, I've done a lot. And you'll be writing away madly and suddenly you'll go, this is ridiculous. So you have to keep writing. You're not allowed to take the pen off. This is ridiculous, I've got to keep writing and I don't know what to say, and something else will come. Because you see, I'm of the belief that many of us have the strength within us to overcome this anxiety. We may need assistance to do it, to access that part of ourselves. But what will happen with the 15 minutes rapid writing, and you do it every day, every morning, early, when the bell goes off, when the alarm goes off on your phone, you shut the book. Now you don't have to reread it. No one else has to see it. And then you get about your day. And it's nearly like you take all of this, the chatter that goes on in your head that's telling you probably quite negative things, and you dump it on the page. And there you leave it for the day. And the next day you do the same thing. Now it's a fascinating experience, because what you'll find is your head will start to clear. And you'll start to give a voice to the parts of yourself that you don't presently acknowledge. And that may be some part of you that's feeling particularly scared. It may be the part of you that feels like they don't get acknowledgement in terms of the fact that they do show up every day and they're courageous. But whatever part of you that isn't getting a voice will be given a voice in those pages. So if you haven't tried it, I'd suggest you try it. Breathing, very significant. Breathing in, very simply, we often say here at South Pacific, breathe in for 3, out for 5. There are various other techniques. Breathe in for 4, hold for 6, out for 12. There's various other breathing techniques. I think breathing's very, very significant for us. But if you've been in anxiety for a very long time and you have a lot of shallow breathing, so that it never gets beyond here, then when I say to clients, in fact I had the experience today with somebody where I said, take a breath, take a breath. They were moving really, talk. I said, let's just slow this down and take a breath. Now I knew that by asking her to take a breath, it was hard for her, because for her to go beyond this part, the shallow breathing, means she has to go down here, and that's where she doesn't want to touch. because she doesn't go beyond here. She's been up here for so long. Now, when she did do some deep breathing, she did, shed a few tears, but she moved into a place that she was frightened of before that moment. And of course, what you realise is if you have support when you do that, you can do it again. And so you don't have to do the shallow breathing up here. You can actually let your breath go deeper. Visualising is always very helpful. Visualising yourself as a, strong, capable person. I often start my groups doing a guided visualisation where I suggest they find their safe place. And that can be a real or imaginary place in the earth or on nature. Now, most of us, if we've had heightened anxiety for most of our lives, we don't have a safe place anywhere. So if we can actually start to visualise what that might look like, and that would be, it can be real or imaginary, but it's just for you. So you take a lot of time to regulate yourself. You start to use the tools that allow you to settle into being more in here and less worried about the future and regretful of the past, because this is the present moment, and that's where we can get the calmness we need to regulate ourselves and to actually look around and see what life is actually offering us. There are very many secondary conditions as a result of heightened anxiety. It could be use of alcohol or drugs, could be use of gambling, sex addiction, could be many other sorts of comorbidic issues that come into our lives, so that we can sort of numb this because it's too hard to live with it. If we have unresolved trauma, that's one of the main things I think that we suffer from. We will have carried feelings from that. We'll have no awareness or ability to express our feelings. It'll leave us overwhelmed, immobilised, or hopeless. In other words, that's where the depression comes in. And those, we can suppress things and go into addiction. We can go into numbing or people pleasing. Codependency is another classic one, where we run around doing for others what they could easily do for themselves. And then we'll become overwhelmed by toxic feelings when we're not getting the recognition that we think we should get because we've done all this stuff for other people. As a result of childhood experiences, we'll often have distorted thinking, and it will be things like, I'm unsafe, I'm unlovable, I don't matter, I'm unworthy. There's sort of a raft of them, and you would actually know what yours is pretty much. I don't deserve, I'm unworthy. And when we live with those very deeply embedded down here, this is another reason that we'll do the shallow breathing up here, because we don't want to go down to that part of us that feels unlovable or unworthy. When we're working with people at South Pacific, we'll often talk about having connection with others. Now, if we're having connection with others, we also want to have connection with some sort of spiritual power, whatever that is. Now, I'm not talking religion now. I'm talking about our belief about how the world works and our place in it. There are very few people I work with that don't have some sort of spiritual belief. And often when people are depressed, they'll talk about themselves as being spiritually bankrupt or dead, feeling dead inside. And there's in that moment when they're talking like that, they have a very significant disconnection to themselves. So we have our mind, we have our body, we have our spirit. We need to be integrating the whole of us so we can move into a life with some sense of joy and freedom. If we feel we're disconnected from the most special part, the most significant part of us, we're not actually going to be able to do that. So we need to have forged neural pathways. We need to create new consciousness and new behaviours, and often that can come as a shock for people when we're working with them. And the other thing that can often happen is when people come in here and they work in groups, they'll actually discover there's other people that are like them, and that their situation is not significantly different from other people who suffer from anxiety. It's a very, it can be a long road away from being crippled by anxiety. It is possible, however, to do it, but it requires having a relationship with ourselves and starting to feel safe with ourselves. It's very important, I think, when we're making a foray into recovery, that we start to trust ourselves and start to back ourselves. And I'm, delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you about this tonight. I feel like there's no greater sadness, really, when life lacks meaning and purpose for you. And I often talk to my clients about what meaning and purpose is in your life. What are the things that you long for, hunger for? What would give your life meaning and purpose? And it doesn't have to be the same for everybody. We're all different. We're all going to make mistakes and get it wrong. We talk often at South Pacific about being perfectly imperfect. I often joke with my clients and say, we're a work in progress, but we're also a masterpiece at the same time. There's a point of us where we have to try and start to work into the recovery world with a sense of lightness and connection, not only with ourselves, but with other people. And I just want to end with this story. Mother had to go and see a doctor, a specialist, and she'd waited quite a while to get this appointment, and she had no choice but to take her little boy with her. And the doctor was a bit concerned about the little boy being in the room and distracting them, because they had some serious things to talk about. So the doctor got an old National Geographic magazine, and he ripped out a page, and it was a map of the world, and it was all those different colours, the ones that we have. And he ripped up the map into all these little pieces, and he gave the little boy some sticky tape and the map, and he mixed all the paper pieces up, and he said to the little boy, put him at another desk, and he put him there, and he said, "Now, I want you to put the map back together." And he thought, that'll keep the little boy busy for at least 20 minutes. In fact, he probably won't get it done while I'm talking to his mum. And within about 10 minutes, the boy got down from the table and he gave the map with the sticky tape properly put together to the doctor. And the doctor couldn't believe it. And he said, "What are you doing? How did you do that? How did you do that?" And the little boy turned the map over, and it was the face of a man. And he said, "I put the person back together, and then the world looked all right." And I think that's what we're doing when we're working with anxiety. We're putting the person back together, integrating, letting go of old traumatic experiences that don't serve us, accepting what we are, who we are, and then the world looks all right. Instead of the other way around, where we're waiting for everything out there to be okay before we're okay. So I hope all that's been helpful. Now, I've got a few comments here. Okay, so Fifi's at Sydney Airport. She's been delayed, so she's sitting listening. Good on you, Fifi, that's great. Louise, I'm terrified about leaving home, leaving the dog at a kennel, going to my 50-year-old leaving school reunion. Well, I'm not surprised you're terrified about that. Feel catastrophic. The women that will be there are non-judgmental, loyal, loving friends that I love. Well, that's wonderful. And I hope the dog's safe at the kennel. God love the dog. He didn't say what the dog's name was. Like a dog, he's wonderful. Hi Di, great to be here. This is Antonio, great to be here listening to you. Recently spent some time at SPP. Can't recommend for people who are struggling how beneficial it would be. I'm so grateful for my experience. And oops, what have I done here? I've done something to make it so big that I can't read it. Sorry. That's good. Yeah, okay. I know where I am. It's made me so. I understand myself See more. Sorry, you can tell I'm technically challenged tonight, aren't I? I'm so grateful for my experience, and it has been an amazing, made me understand myself, make better, healthy decisions in my life. I'm delighted to hear that, Antonio. Mary Jane, I'm terrified of your life. Yes. I think if we're frightened to do anything, take a step away from any sort of abusive situation, we must ask for help. There are many services available now for people who suffer abuse. In the first instance, of course, there's always Lifeline. You can always ring the domestic violence line, that's another one. And I totally understand being terrified, because of course if we're traumatised as children, we'll replay that often in our relationships. But ironically, what's more terrifying is being alone, and that's generally because we were terribly lonely as children. Sasa said, very grateful for when I did SPP, gave me my tools in my toolbox I need for sobriety, and I'm very pleased to hear that you're still sober. That's wonderful. There's a couple of other questions here, if I could just scroll down. Let's have a look here. No, this other one, yeah. Over here I need to be. Sorry, I'm getting assistance because... So let me just have a look at these other ones. How can we work out if we're anxious, depressed or stressed? What's the difference? Well, when we're anxious, we begin to live in a constant state of heightened alert. You know, it's like we're never offline, and we're prevented from living life with ease and enjoyment. We can't just simply go through life in a gentle way. We'll be constantly trying to second guess what happens. It's like the antenna alert's on. And if we're good at our jobs, family, you know, are we loved? You know, it's like we never stop critiquing ourselves. Mind you, often no one else is critiquing us. It's what we're making up in our head. And honestly, when you think about what the stories you make up in your head about what other people think of you and what you think of you, and it's no surprise that we get very, very filled with dread, which is a classic case of being anxious. When we're stressed, we're usually short-tempered, irritable and angry, and we might try and cover that up with a sort of passive-aggressive response. We'll often make up a story of one's letting us down. We often sit in a place of feeling perfect. Never a good place for any of us, I don't think. And whilst everyone's, you know, not rising to our standards, or, you know, as I said, they're all letting us down. When we're depressed, our mood will be low and our energy will be depleted. We'll often feel sad and emotional pain. This is extremely difficult, this place to be. And we might start having thoughts of not wanting to be here. And when those sort of beliefs, such as, you know, they'd be better off without me, start to invade our, it's a massive red flag, and we need to tell someone how we're feeling and to reach out for help. Okay, Louise has told me the dog's name's Vera. She's a Jack Russell. Oh, great. Been 3 times to South Pacific. So true about not feeling worthy, to have never felt enough. It's very true. I'm not drinking, using drugs. I feel codependent. I'm constantly in fight, flight, and slightly frozen. Do you know, it's an interesting thing, isn't it, that fight, flight, or slightly frozen? I do think that that's a trauma response. You know, particularly if there's not, if we're looking around our lives and there's not really anything to be terrified of, there's nothing happening that we're in danger, and we're still doing that, then there's a sense of still being in that state we were when we were little. We've got another one here. Thank you. I'm so grateful for my time at SPP and the support I'm getting through the continued day programs. Well, Kirsten, I think that's very helpful, isn't it? Because as many of you know, and some won't, we've got a 3-day inpatient program, and then we have day programs which follow on from that to support the transition from being inside, I was going to say inside, that's terrible, isn't it? In the hospital to outside, and then using our skills that we've learned in the hospital to settle into our new way of life. Beck says, can you please tell us more about fawning? Yes, of course. And I've got prayer hands from Sam, so that's great. Fawning is the response we have when we go into people pleasing. It's very codependent behaviour. So rather than actually be in a position where we can speak up for ourselves, we're often doing a lot of thinking about what everybody else wants us to do, and we're often not asking what they want. We're making up a story about what they want, doing what they want, so being codependent. And then what will happen is we'll get very, we can, you may not, but I have done this, get resentful when they don't do what I want. Now, they didn't ask for help in the first place, but the fawning is where we go into people pleasing and we go to that codependent behaviour where, in its most simplest form, codependency is I am doing for somebody else which they could easily do for themselves. Now, even in my family system, when I might think to myself, oh, my adult daughter might like it if I do X, Y, Z. I never just do X, Y, Z. I always send her a text and say, would you like me to? I always ask. I never assume that she expects me to do anything. And I have said to her on more than one occasion, you know, I'm not a mind reader. I don't know what you need. If you need anything from me or you want anything from me, ask me. And, you know, just be prepared to hear the no if it's a no, or yes when it's a yes. And that's the other thing. If you hear a no from other people and you feel offended and personalise that, it's like they're not saying no to be nasty to you as a general rule. They're just saying no because that's the truth for them. And what I've learned about no's and yeses, if I say no when I mean no and yes when I mean yes, I get less likely to be in any sort of resentment with anybody. Okay, Deb, here we are, thank you. We've just sent Mary Jane a text about what might be able to help her. Deb, thank you very much. I'm here to learn understanding of the anxiety that my children have as adults. Yes, often our children have anxiety, which is very distressing, isn't it? And what I've found about that is that when I'm, as an adult person, a grandmother now, if I take care of myself and my recovery and I get into recovery around any of this stuff, it reverberates on them and I can facilitate them getting help too. Now I've just jumped a bit, sorry, I'll have to go down. Because I tell about fawning, go inside with Di, yes, Mary Jane, okay, Deb, okay, and Debbie, found the description of stress versus anxiety so helpful. I keep thinking I'm anxious, but maybe I'm highly stressed, ? Or both. Well, maybe you are highly stressed, Deb, because I think you've got a very significant job. Sorry, I'm just having a little technical problem. Here we go, that's great, thank you. Kirsten, it's great to hear. We wish you the best in your journey, right? So I think that we're probably nearly, have we got any more? That's it, okay. I think that we've actually come to the end of most of the questions. This will be on the South Pacific Facebook page. So if you want to re-listen, I hope it's been helpful. I do want to thank you for joining us tonight. It's a difficult thing to live with anxiety. I think many of us in the world today have it, and it's just to the degree with which we can work with it. We need to feel safe in the world. Anxiety is a lack of internalised safety. Some of us are more sensitive to it than others. Some can live with it, some can't. If you're struggling with it and you feel that you want to reach out and get help, please feel free to do that. You can ring South Pacific at any time and we'll be here to pick up the call. So thank you very much for joining me this evening. Diane Young, signing off for tonight. Thank you.